It's great to be here. Last week I drove up from Boston to Concord, New Hampshire, where I read to either 3 or 4 people, depending on whether a fetus in the 3rd trimester counts as a person. So it's really quite a difference. I think there are a lot of people here that I owe a lot to, but I can't see that far, so I won't name them. But I will say that Deborah's one of my favorite friends and people in the world, and a great poet that I've taught at Wellesley to student Rhapsody, and just how magical it is to come here. So I'm going to read from this book. I'll tell you little things about it as I go along. The first poem is a kind of a irritable spring poem. Many of the poems in the book stage a contest between accosting and confiding. Both are strategies of bringing someone, I don't know, nearer or something. But anyway, you'll see what I mean. Away we go. Little bird, little sugar cube, tell me all the state secrets of the crabapple, barberry, brake, the concealed locales, the plots only you can unravel, my figurine, or my collectible dinnerware. I've hunted everywhere for answers. Answer me, my Jersey kingpin, my flower hoarder, electronic eye, my wind-up mini Frankenstein. If I speak into your corsage and say it slowly so we both nod off, my father died, nor was he at the height of his career as a bowler, nor had he discovered the cure for NASCAR. Quite without fanfare, little jackass, oh my severely damaged little friend, he died. And what I felt, peapod, projection, tired device, was shy. Surely you can identify flight risk, going from unconscious whim to whim as though the forest was only scenery. I settle for thick yogurt, bird, while you get to eat the scenery. I'm one of the whims, fatherless in this brand new way, observing as my father's features idle inside and thicken my son's cheekbones. Where did you come by your business casual, your sturdiness and eerie sobriety, auditing the spring's enormous income while I piss my windfall zilch away? So my father did die in 2009, and I never knew him. He left our family when I was 11 months old. But the weird thing is I never knew anything about him. It was not discussed. It was not to be discussed. It was actually an advantage growing up because I liked being mysterious. I liked being more than what met the eye. And I could make up lies about him, and they couldn't be disproven. I mean, they weren't technically lies. Who knew? Anyway, so when he died, I felt somehow that he and I had been playing a game all this time, and that he had quit with a score tied. So I've written many poems about games, where, particularly one-on-one games, where the competitors are also collaborators. They both have to agree to keep playing. One-on-one. One. It is the nature of this game to want possession, then to want to give it up, to get it back, so you can give it up again. Nobody stops to ponder the ball the way John Keats pondered a cue ball's roundness, smoothness, volubility, its joy in being hit. Imagine the score is tied, and I take the ball away in order to sketch it or incorporate it into some kind of quasi-tribal dance routine. I thought we had agreed to play. I thought you said we'd play and play all day, beating and being beaten, taking turns at losing, learning its advantages for a young man's character, then changing fates. What kind of game is this? You're going away forever, sending word years later that you died. I grew up in Vermont. There's a lot of snow in these poems, including in this one too. In high school, we had parties in the woods in the winter. and we rode snowmobiles higher and higher until we were high enough nobody could see any sign of our fire. If there was a girl you liked, you sort of nuzzled up beside her, if that was her, if that was even a girl. It was hard to tell in the dark, in our gigantic parkas, who was who. You had to make a guess based on factors extremely difficult to discern in the wind by a sputtering fire, and sometimes you cuddled the hockey captain. 3, Titian versus Roadrunner. I think the best painting we have in Boston is Titian's Rape of Europa, the gardener. You probably picture it. It's got a bull, Zeus, in the guise of a bull, carrying away this maiden. And so I was trying to think about how to represent flight in a still picture. And that's one painting that does it. It represents movement, fleeing flight. And then, you know who Roadrunner was, right? I remember watching Roadrunner, and sometimes Roadrunner would evade the coyote by just running out of the TV. He'd leave the frame, and the coyote would go like, where did he go? So that, anyway. Titian versus Roadrunner. If you are made for flight, intended for it, you had better find a pursuer fast. Otherwise, all that fleeing is going nowhere. This bull, he's got a bad intent. He wants to hog the entire corner of the picture. The girl is looking tasty to the espying putti. This small bird crisscrossing my childhood at enormous speed, outrunning everything, running out of road to run down, running out of canyon, running out of cartoon, runs out of the cartoon, never to return. That's why this landscape looks forlorn. 4, tackle football. Growing up, one feature of my childhood was that the VCR was invented and started appearing in my friends' houses when I was a kid. And its main advantage was that you could pause, like R-rated movies, you could pause images of like topless women and stuff, and which we would do, but when you did it, they blurred. So there's some wisdom in that. When you possess something, it loses its luster or something. Tackle football. Snow up to our waists and coming down still. There was a field here once when we began. We marked the end zones and set up the goals. Now nobody can even move, much less tackle. I am Ganymede fleeing on a temple frieze. We stand around like lovesick Neanderthals. We're Pompeian before Pompeii was hot. We have the aspect of the classic dead or of stranded, shivering astronauts. It was early in the era of the pause button. We paused and paused the afternoons away, indoors, blasting our ballistic erections at the blurred bikinis of celebrities, then splaying on the linoleum floor, awaited the apportioned pizza delivery. Now someone has paused us, or so it appears, but they didn't pause the snow or the hour. As the one gets higher, the other gets later. When I was most keenly wondering where and who my father was at 8 or 9, I later learned after he died from sources that he was in the Northwest Territories of Canada teaching ESL to the Inuit during those years. So I have a number of outbursts against the Inuit in these poems. 5, I might have been John Keats for all you knew. I still could be. It's not impossible. For several years, John Keats was not John Keats. So say I was John Keats and you'd gone to Alaska. Odd choice you made, preferring snow to poetry. The point is to stick around on the slender chance a person's son turns into a canonical writer. The point is not to shiver on the horizon and correct an Inuit's prepositions. I was tiny to you, like all things far away. But you were tiny too, and plus you were cold. You look like a bumblebee in your tiny snowsuit. Flying back one summer from teaching with Deborah and Megan, other people that I adore in France, My wife and kids had gone ahead a few days, so I was alone on the plane. And I sat next to this woman, very, very old woman, probably 100 years old, I'm not kidding, from Kenya. And she was reading a prayer book the whole time. And so every time there was an event and the plane took off, she would cross herself and say a prayer. So I thought I should get to know this person. And we became friends over the course of that flight. And on the way out of the plane, she said to me, I told her that I was a teacher and a writer. She said, tell your students something. She said, tell them that the donkey is the noblest of all the beasts because Christ rode on his back. The donkey. This time around, we start out in the clouds. Look down, our ceiling is plush carpeting. An elderly Kenyan beside us is praying. She gets out her missal and silently reads. The donkey bore our Christ upon his back, and yet this beast is not respected. Nobody tells how bravely he acted. Let that be the subject of your book. The donkey, he is the noblest of beasts, says this woman to me when I tell her I work as a writer and a teacher. Why people do show him this disrespect. Then she turns back to her small red missal. Occasionally I hear her whisper, amen. Her son sets out now to meet her in Boston. I am watching the big screen in the aisle where you and I, the woman, and everyone crawl like a housefly across the screen inside a tiny icon of the plane we're on, more real to ourselves as a representation. All of us going west inside the circuitry that guides the plane across continents and guides the icon plane across the screen, riding that circuitry like a super strong donkey. So tell everyone when you put down my book, the donkey is the noblest of beasts, for he bore on his back the suffering Christ, and never once wavered, nor shuddered, nor broke. I think poems are about, I think we live in radically linear language circumstances usually. Sentences open and close. Stories have a beginning, middle, and end, at least conventionally. Conversations open, they develop, they close. I think poems are repetitive by nature. That's their nature. They repeat. They represent. They bring up the past into the present in changed circumstances. And I think that's why they're such good time pieces. So I mentioned that because this is a poem called The Flume. It's about a water ride in Paris that our kids like to go on. And well, you'll see how it's about repetition and so on. The Flume, that was the name of the ride. Here we go, up again, the mountain. The men who have assembled it for years assembled yesterday, so that you and I, headed who knows where together, but headed there together, will see from the top, the bottom, from the bottom, the top. Then feel the inside, outside, all over, nowhere. My God, I am going to die, not someday, now, sensation. That once we plateau feels silly, since when were we safer than when we sought the danger that when it subsided, returned us to the dangers it had blotted out. There are no fears here at the start. This is when the book just opened, knowing you will one day know the story you don't know yet changes the story you are getting to know. The way we know before we know what anything means, it means a fireworks display, the birthday of the country. That's me. My uncle and I are racing through the past on the Python, which men assembled absent-mindedly that day. And so you could visit it with me, I assembled here again inside my memory. Now, when you remember how things were today, you will also remember yourself looking forward to yourself looking back. A looking back that here in your past you already say about what happened yesterday, remember when. The future doing its usual loop-de-loop, the sons all turning into fathers until the absent-minded men take the ride down. It's said that having children gives you a sense of the cyclical nature of life. It is true until you see them growing old very rapidly, and then you're thrown right back upon the linear nature of life, counting itself down and out. So anyway. Okay, so if you're old enough to remember 1979 and liked baseball, you might remember a guy named Thurman Munson who played for the Yankees. He was a young player, great prospect for the Yankees. We were in Vermont, we were Red Sox fans. So it was like August, I was at my neighbor's pool. The news came on the radio that Thurman Munson had died. I was 8 or so, maybe I said that. We had 2 responses. The first was, that's awful. The second was, maybe a little opportunity to be exploited for us Red Sox fans. Anyway, I got interested in the total absence of empathy among kids around 7 or 8. You know, they just see the other's injury as an opportunity to get more attention, for example. I think fans are like that. Like, you don't, if you're a fan of the Red Sox, you don't applaud when the Yankees guy dies, of course. But if he like tears out his knee or like rips out his rotator cuff, you know, nobody thinks about how much pain he's in. It's a villanelle. Star catcher. We felt like dying when the Yankees won. In 1979, they seemed to win all summer. Our luck changed when the plane went down. My friend was born because his brother drowned. We rode robin's egg bikes alongside each other. We felt like dying when the Yankees won. Time that is huge at the start of the season, by August grows smaller and smaller. The clock stopped when the plane went down. The logic of loss we could all understand. Every fan trusts that losing is barter. Though we wanted to die when the Yankees won, we knew that all losers eventually win. Every drowned brother results in another. As the plane goes, so goes Thurman Munson. Now, Tommy John, Ron Guidry, and the whole rotation, whenever they pitched, would pitch to air. The star catcher was gone. Even if the Yankees won, they lost their catcher, their star, Thurman Munson. This too is a villanelle at some form. I read in Janet Malcolm, the great journalist and writer Janet Malcolm, had a Paris Review interview done by, I think, by Katie Royfee, great interview. And at the end of the headnote, Katie Royfee wrote, Ms. Malcolm changed some of the questions when she had read her answers. So I wrote this poem. Interviewing Janet Malcolm. To interview the interviewer, you need a mirror. She's trading privacy for peekaboo. Janet Malcolm writes the questions that she answers. Her apartment had the air of New York writer, the cat, the glass-top table, a park view. On the far wall, facing us, an ornate mirror. Her cat, and not her id, caused the disorder. This poem is partly false and partly true. Janet Malcolm writes the questions that she answers. The cat was just one detail in the picture. The table was classic Mies van der Rohe. Outside, the reservoir was a big mirror. That day, my objectivity danced with hers, our journalistic egos locked in tango. She rewrote the questions she had answered. She interviewed herself, I realized later. I was bystander to a rendezvous. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Janet Malcolm changed the questions she had answered. I'll read one poem from a sequence called Opening Lines. It's a lullaby. You must promise not to fall asleep. Anyway, it was written actually to be accompanied by music, and there are things in it that feel awkward to be read aloud because you actually would want some music to separate phrases, but it didn't work out, so I think it's still decent. Anyway, lullaby. Oh, all the stars and the Big Dipper and their reflections in the ocean, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. and the creatures, their weird behaviors, some made to thrive and some to die. Part of their natures, part of their natures. It doesn't matter. It happens later. All of creation, the 7 days, the famous storm, the rainbow after. One day the cardinal, he wakes up red. One day the jay realizes why, of all the creatures, he got his color. This happens later. Tonight, good night. When someone wins, somebody loses. Something is ravaged, something is fed. All of history, even the Romans, they happen later. Tonight, sleep tight. You'll learn this later. Tonight, good night. And all desire and every setback, these happen later, happen much later. Tonight, it's late. Tonight, it's late. You could stay up, but then the past would just be longer, be that much longer. Sleep will take care of the extra hours. You'll learn it later. It happens later. The gains we made, they'd be erased by another day, another day. Tonight you're sleepy, so close your eyes. Here's a poem that when I wrote it, I emailed it immediately to Deborah. We were in Paris, and she told me it was good, like that instant. It's called Father and Son. It's a tribute actually to Stevens the Snowman. I thought of calling it the Snowman. One of the virtues of that poem is that it has all these negatives. It's very hard to sort out the different negatives. You'll see the influence. Father and son, only much later did they see, the two of them, that never knowing one another, there was nothing not to know. That not being to begin with meant those later, more drastic negations negated nothing. This was to be the poignant part of it. Nothing, nevertheless, would someday end. And the wish, he wished it in a priory, he wished it in a mall, was that when nothing ended, it might be, if not an event, at least not a non-event, which in the end, when it happened, it wasn't. So if you can untangle those negatives, you can tell me better than I can tell myself what I felt and still feel. So I'm skipping the back of the book. I'm just going to read this is a short sequence. There's a lot of basketball in this poem, in this book. Before I was dwarfed by my friends in 9th grade, I was a very good basketball player. And I was cut from the team in 9th grade, and at least the way I remember it, I just decided, just like that, I'm going to become literary. So when I was writing this book, I thought that in a way poetry is literally for me an alternate basketball. And I don't want to push it too far, but they're both played on a rectangular court, and there's rhythm, and poetry's a timed game. It's like you can tell the clock's running because of the lines. It's not like baseball where it could potentially last forever. The clock runs out. So anyway, this is a poem about, it's called Box in One, which you have to be sort of a purist of a basketball to know what that is. It's a defense you play. 4 guys play zone, 1 guy plays man-to-man. And it's when there's somebody on the other team who's just disproportionately amazing. The rest of the team's kind of bad, and there's one guy who's just great. I played CYO basketball. I'm really going to read the poem in a second. I played CYO basketball, Catholic basketball. All the teams had names like Mother of Christ. So we get in the huddle and we go, we're going to kill Mother of Christ! Box in One. Here is our box in one, the crucifix and ice pick in the back of the wily point guard trooper's son. Our press owes everything to Christ. Our swish is the blood of sacrifice. Last week, we fucking killed St. Paul. We're on defense inside my head. The little synaptic me, number 5, guards a little synaptic forward inside the exact simulacrum of the old gym, eons later, now gooey with my brain matter. And now the forward posts and plants his feet. Eureka, I had this thought. To get a girl to flash her breasts from her back patio, first hold her cat hostage, then threatened the cat with fireworks aimed straight at its head. So that was puberty, caught cat. A pivot, another pivot, a pick. He plays me tight, but I have my elation as my guide. I have won not just any game, a cyclicky congratulates me. I'll be in the hall of immortals. I'll be immortal in the memory of men. For writing poetry, I'll be the poet equivalent of a cyclicky. That's not a literary allusion. That was a guy in our town that was really good at basketball. I wanted to get a lot of names of people into this poem. This is a public service announcement, this next section. All rabbits in my poems are based on an actual rabbit I caught, cognizant of Centennial Field and thick ravine, never the transparent eyeball, ever the perv of Colchester Ave. This guy named Thigpen, he was from Alabama. He played football with my uncle at UVM. He used to come over, and he was really nice to me. What Thigpen wrought, Thigpen got. Linebacker, Southerner, surrounded by rhymes inside this poem. Now he hides inside the void who lassoed me, dim, kind, and drunk. Now I'm out of bounds, 10 souls numbered, and not one of them is me. I try to inhere inside a kayak bound for Juniper Island, but find instead my psyche in a mini bonsai in a wrecked terrarium. The cat was a Japanese maple. The girl was my right fist. The firecrackers were Seth's anyway. Nothing I say is true, nor is it wrong to say it's wrong to say. My grandfather had a depth finder. He could find any walleye in the breakwater of the lake. It worked by radar, no sonar, no Kevlar, no mylar, no anger, no prayer. One day, a walleye appeared upon the deck of his boat, a sign from God, an edible. That weekend's game, I had the calm of the elect as I smashed Christ the King with my inimitable foul shot and later feasted on the oracle Orida. A sign from God who said, Daniel, go inside in the back of your blacklit closet and commune with a magazine. And lo, some later you, years after, in the middle of his life's journey, will peer over your shoulder and wonder what it's like inside the inside of the cover girl. 10 souls numbered. Instinctively, they play the roles my memory assigns. The wily one is always Hansus. It's always Aguiar's temper. The jump shot effloresces every time inside Lorenz's palm. 10 souls, and there I am. No, there, the shivering one, St. Johnsbury. I'm sidelined. I ventriloquize whatever man I become. I emote like a hawk. My vantage point is treetops, prey. Whatever I see, you see. I have my famous throb already on. There's one more poem. It's the title poem. It takes like 7 minutes to read. I'm really grateful to Megan and to Deborah and to Darren Straus, who read it the day I wrote it. I just had one memory that was my first narrative memory, not a snapshot, but a little film strip. I was at the Bicentennial celebration in Burlington, Vermont in 1976, and somebody, like a neighbor or something, picked me up and put me on his shoulders so I could see the concert. So that's all I really remember from that day. But I wrote this poem sort of to accumulate around that memory. Bicentennial. 1. Moving as a mind moves across a math problem, or an eye across a lover's body, or a dragonfly across the sky, or history through wars and bodies, or a film from frame to frame, or the moods, strangers to each other, or a ferry across the lake all day. Move with me now, for I need company. I have this wish to get caught up in something precisely unlike a poem, unlike writing for its straightforwardness, its power that is not the power of half-secrecy, but is instead something enormous and potentially dangerous. And this is all, I'm afraid, will move my mind 1 inch, off the small white tee where it sits and waits. My mind sits on its small white tee and waits for something like what others experience when they avert a tragedy, but barely. And all of life is refocused in that moment. Even the parts they hated yesterday, or worse than hated, felt merely a blank where emotion would be, a blank where meaning would be if only they, too, could find the exact site in Paris by the Seine where the princess died, and see the spot and remember the night she died, late in New York, in the era when my friends and I did copious amounts of ecstasy at parties, and when it hit you, you simply shone. Now everyone in that room was beautiful, and in the mirror your own face was a gift for which you owed even total strangers thanks. This was what led you in the first place to make the call, pool the money, and meet the guy in an alley off West 4th Street, returning to the bar or party with a handful of banana-colored pills, heads back and away we go, though that night none of us expected to go exactly where we were going that night. I remember later in the Standards Bar, the weeping men who, by some accident of history and their bodies, it happened, cared for her the way you would a friend. And one man requested, "Oh, lady, be good," at the bar. And the sad, slow song rang through the bar until I did feel, as the song kept telling me I did, like a lonesome babe in the wood, adrift upon some serotonin raft in a wide, slow stream of time. Late in the night of my childhood, before I had done anything yet I would regret. Now it was 1976, and my body in my bed felt for the first time what being part of a country feels like, a memory of flags and songs and foods I'd never had before, for it was the country's birthday. The country was having its birthday party in a park by the lake. What being part of a country felt like in the park, with the entire breakwater full of boats, with ferry boats blaring music offshore, everyone acting as though it made them happy to be part of the country, even those I later learned were hippies, including my aunts and uncles, whose code seemed to include, toward children, kindness. What it felt like being part of a country was to be quite specifically targeted for love, as though a letter from a stranger had arrived, delivering the best, the most unexpected news. A neighbor put me up on his shoulders so I could see better the band concert, war veterans playing French horn, the neighbor who moved to Boston and became a caterer before he moved back home into his bedroom where his parents cared for him the year he died. He'd been my babysitter, the only boy who ever cared for me, and I remember his patience in watching me play, for he too seemed to have kindness as part of his code. And when he died, the neighbors gathered in the small front yard and planted a lilac, which whenever I visit home, I go and see. Did you know, next door to our house, there used to be a small stained glass chapel attached to a dormitory, where the masses had a distinct folk flair, and kindness radiated from the mousy students, almost as though it was part of their code. The girls from Rutland or St. Johnsbury, or far away, like Danbury, Connecticut, girls that now would be approaching 60, who sometimes cared for me upstairs in their tidy dorm rooms, with crucifixes on the corkboard, coffee mugs, and toys they brought with them from home, which now they gave to me so I could play. And sometimes nuns in a convent, whose code, it appeared, included kindness, showed me the few things that they brought, 5, from home to their small cell-like rooms. One, a young nun, was a coin collector, and she showed me a Standing Liberty quarter engraved with the first initial of a boy she dated and who'd taken her to the fair. I had the distinct impression she still loved him, the way the whole afternoon led up to her getting the quarter from her drawer and putting it on the TV tray next to her bed, next to the rosary, and watched me react when she said the word boy. "What does R stand for, sister?" "Richard," she said. And I wondered, since I was a coin collector too, I knew the value of every coin, how much less it now is worth engraved. Now she puts the coin into the drawer, and we move inside my mind to the Paris skyline, where an enormous Ferris wheel appears, lit by the light it generates, a wheel that spins and spins nowhere, nowhere, all night, whether we watch it or not. And children having their childhoods right now, this late in time, as though they had to stand in line, 6, just to be born, get on and ride. And from the top, they see the sliver of history fate is allowing them to see before they disembark and scatter, some to joy, some to misery. And whether they live for 100 years or die, as some have, tomorrow, this is the childhood these children are having, which is something I remind my own children all the time. I say, "You are having your childhood now." And they say, "Yes, Daddy." And I say, jokingly, but not really, "How do you feel this going?" And they light up and they say, "Great," which is just what I would have said as a kid if someone, though who would it have been, had asked me this very same question. You are having your childhood now. Today you went to the Bicentennial. Everyone in the world was there, and you were there. How does that feel? That's when I say, brightening, great, and wait until later, much later in life, as they must wait for the real answer. I'm having my childhood now. That's me. I'm at a party, 7, by the lake. The boats jostle for space inside the breakwater. A neighbor lifts me up to see the band concert. The French horns blare. The men wear their war uniforms. The hippies are writing history. The ferries are playing blues for the private parties. The mountains across the water, that's New York. I'm having my childhood right now in this country in 1976. That's me near the cannons that point to the Adirondacks. That's me clapping when the parade wends by. I am in a park by the lake. This is the exact moment in time when I exist as a 5-year-old in this country, and everyone is there at the Bicentennial. There's the mayor of the Chamber of Commerce, and there's the National Guard and the Rotarians, and there's my daddy, though he never knew me, my handsome daddy, happy, dancing the day away, my tall, handsome daddy and his brand new family, just starting out in life, elated at the thought they'd made it this far, to this enormous party the country threw for itself, because who else would? 1 billion years ago, today, on its birthday. Thanks.
So it's very nice to be here again, and particularly to be reading with Dan, and I really enjoyed listening to you. Thanks. I'm going to read from the new book. I've been reading this work for a little while now because I like to read brand new work, and for quite a while it was brand new, then it was less brand new. But at least now it's brand new in a book. And pretty soon I'll start reading stories that aren't in a book, but for now, boy, that's an incoherent introduction. Anyway, these stories sort of fall into different categories, and I'm going to kind of read them that way because it's a little easier than just reading them one after another in a kind of miscellany. So I'm going to start with, and I've just learned how to, well, figured out how to color code my reading, so that I had to do it by the rainbow, you know, start with red, and then go to orange, yellow. Then I forgot, so green comes out of orange, blue comes again. But the first bunch I'll read are sort of more Homey stories, Homey type stories. The first is called A Story of Stolen Salamis. My son's Italian landlord in Brooklyn kept a shed out back in which he cured and smoked salamis. One night, in the midst of a wave of petty vandalism and theft, the shed was broken into and the salamis were taken. My son talked to his landlord about it the next day, commiserating over the vanished sausages. The landlord was resigned and philosophical, but corrected him. They were not sausages, they were salamis. Then the incident was written up in one of the city's more prominent magazines as an amusing and colorful urban incident. In the article, the reporter called the stolen goods sausages. My son showed the article to his landlord, who hadn't known about it. The landlord was interested and pleased that the magazine had seen fit to report the incident, but he added, they weren't sausages, they were salamis. Circular story. On Wednesday mornings early, there's always a racket out there on the road. It wakes me up and I always wonder what it is. It is always the trash collection truck picking up the trash. The truck comes every Wednesday morning early. It always wakes me up. I always wonder what it is. My sister and the Queen of England. For 50 years now, nag, 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 and harp, harp, harp. No matter what my sister did, it wasn't good enough for my mother or for my father either. She moved to England to get away and married an Englishman. And when he died, she married another Englishman. But that wasn't enough. Then she was awarded the Order of the British Empire. My parents flew over to England and watched from across the ballroom floor as my sister walked out there alone and stood and talked to the Queen of England. They were impressed. My mother told me in a letter that no one else receiving honors that day talked to the Queen as long as my sister did. I wasn't surprised because my sister has always been a great talker, no matter what the occasion. But when I asked my mother later what my sister was wearing, she didn't remember very well. White gloves and some kind of a tent, she said. 4 Lords of Parliament had mentioned my sister in their maiden speeches because she had done so much for the disabled. And she treated the disabled, my mother said, like anyone else. She talked to her drivers the same way she talked to the Lords, and she talked to the Lords the same way she talked to the disabled. Everyone loved her, and no one minded that her house was a little untidy. My mother said the house was still untidy, and my sister was still letting her figure go. She invited too many people into her home, and she left the butter out all day. She told too much of her private business to her friend, the Indian grocer on the corner, and she wouldn't stop talking. But my mother and father felt they had to keep quiet, because how could they say anything against her now? She had done so much good and was so admired. I'm proud of my sister, and I'm happy for her because of the award. But I'm also happy that my mother and father have finally been silenced for a while, and will let her alone for a while, though I don't think it will be for long. And I'm sorry it took the Queen of England to do it. This one's called Negative Emotions. A well-meaning teacher, inspired by a text he had been reading, once sent all the other teachers in his school a message about negative emotions. The message consisted entirely of advice quoted from a Vietnamese Buddhist monk. Emotion, said the monk, is like a storm. It stays for a while and then it goes. Upon perceiving the emotion like a coming storm, one should put oneself in a stable position. One should sit or lie down. One should focus on one's abdomen. One should focus specifically on the area just below one's navel and practice mindful breathing. If one can identify the emotion as an emotion, it may then be easier to handle. The other teachers were puzzled. They did not understand why their colleague had sent them a message about negative emotions. They resented the message, and they resented their colleague. They thought he was accusing them of having negative emotions and needing advice about how to handle them. Some of them were, in fact, angry. The teachers did not choose to regard their anger as a coming storm. They did not focus on their abdomens. They did not focus on the area just below their navels. Instead, they wrote back immediately, declaring that because they did not understand why he had sent it, his message had filled them with negative emotions. They told him that it would take a lot of practice for them to get over the negative emotions caused by his message. But, they went on, they did not intend to do this practice. Far from being troubled by their negative emotions, they said, they in fact liked having negative emotions, particularly about him and his message. So the next group is a group of what I've called dream stories, and I've labeled them that way in the book, I think, because they would simply be, I think, too odd if they didn't have that label. They are little stories taken from either my own dreams or the dreams of friends, or waking experiences that were like dreams or that could be seen as dreams if you abstracted certain of the things about them that made them understandable and ordinary. And it was just a little sort of challenge to myself for a while. It began to interest me, the sort of border between actual dreams and waking life that was like dream. And I also wanted to see how you could tell both so that they sound like dreams. So I'll read a few of those. The child. She is bending over her child. She can't leave her. The child is laid out in state on a table. She wants to take one more photograph of the child, probably the last. In life, the child would never sit still for a photograph. She says to herself, I'm going to get the camera, as if saying to the child, don't move. The train station. The train station is very crowded. People are walking in every direction at once, though some are standing still. A Tibetan Buddhist monk with shaved head and long wine-colored robe is in the crowd looking worried. I am standing still watching him. I have plenty of time before my train leaves because I have just missed a train. The monk sees me watching him. He comes up to me and tells me he is looking for track number 3. I know where the tracks are. I show him the way. The nice thing about traveling is that you can stand around looking puzzled and studying people, and people don't notice you because they're either so busy worrying about their own travel plans, or they just think you're totally caught up with your travel plans, whereas actually you're busy eavesdropping and watching them. This is called the piano. We are about to buy a new piano. Our old upright has a crack all the way through the sounding board and other problems. We would like the piano shop to take it and resell it, but they tell us it is too badly damaged and cannot be resold to anyone else. They say it will have to be pushed over a cliff. This is how they will do it. 2 truck drivers take it to a remote spot. One driver walks away down the lane with his back turned, while the other shoves it over the cliff. The sentence and the young man. A sentence lies exposed to public view in an open trash can. It is the ungrammatical sentence, who sing? We are watching it from where we stand concealed in a shadowed archway. We see a young man walk past the trash can several times, eyeing the sentence curiously. We will stay where we are for fear that at any moment he will reach in quickly and fix it. 2 characters in a paragraph. The story is only 2 paragraphs long. I'm working on the end of the 2nd paragraph, which is the end of the story. I'm intent on this work and my back is turned. And while I'm working on the end, look what they're up to in the beginning. And they're not very far away. He seems to have drifted from where I put him and is hovering over her, only 1 paragraph away in the 1st paragraph. True, it is a dense paragraph, and they're in the very middle of it, and it's dark in there. I knew they were both in there, but when I left it and turned to the 2nd paragraph, there wasn't anything going on between them. Now look. So the next group are Flaubert stories taken from Flaubert. And I talked a little bit about this afternoon for those hardy souls who resisted the spring sunshine outside and came to hear a very word-by-word sort of examination of some passages of my Flaubert translation. Little did they know. While I was working on the translation, I was reading Flaubert's letters. The letters he wrote while he was working on Madame Bovary, because I wanted to see what was going on in his mind, how the work was going, and what he felt about the characters and the scenes and the writing problems. And I actually learned a lot because he spoke very freely about all this. He was writing mostly to his lover, Louise Collet, who was a poet. And it was unfortunate that they broke up when he was about 2/3 of the way through the novel. So suddenly we were cut off from knowing more intimately how he was experiencing the last part of writing that novel. But he would write to her at 1 or 2 in the morning after a long day's work. And in the course of the letters, I would now and then come upon a sort of self-contained little story that he would tell her of something that had happened the day before or that afternoon. I began to look forward to them and to see them as sort of separate entities, and then had this idea of extracting them from the book of letters and having the liberty to shape them as I wanted to make them into full stories, which is a liberty I wouldn't have if I was doing a straight translation of his work. But he couldn't stop me, so I took this liberty and made about 13 stories and then one rant, one of his rants against industry. So I'm going to read a few of the stories. The first is called The Cook's Lesson. So most of the material, the language, and the sequence of sentences is really his, but I've done what I wanted to do to change sentences and end it where I want. So, The Cook's Lesson. Today I have learned a great lesson. Our cook was my teacher. She is 25 years old and she's French. I discovered when I asked her that she did not know that Louis-Philippe is no longer King of France, and we now have a republic. And yet it has been 5 years since he left the throne. She said the fact that he is no longer king simply does not interest her in the least. Those were her words. And I think of myself as an intelligent man. But compared to her, I'm an imbecile. He had great scorn for people who had too much respect for government, that sort of thing. My colors are confusing me here. The chairs. Louis has been in the church in Mont looking at the chairs. He has been looking at them very closely. He wants to learn as much as he can about the people from looking at their chairs, he says. He started with the chair of a woman he calls Madame Fricotte. Maybe her name was written on the back of the chair. She must be very stout, he says. The seat of the chair has a deep hollow in it, and the prayer stool has been reinforced in a couple of places. Her husband may be a rich man because the prayer stool is upholstered in red velvet with brass tacks. Or he thinks the woman may be the widow of a rich man because there is no chair belonging to Monsieur Flicot, unless he's an atheist. In fact, perhaps Madame Flicot, if she is a widow, is looking for another husband, since the back of her chair is heavily stained with hair dye. Louis was a very good friend of his, so Louis appears in more than one story. And the last is a longer one that's more like a scene, really. The Old Soldier. I saw something the other day that moved me, though I had nothing to do with it. We were 3 miles from here at the ruins of Lassay Chateau, built in 6 weeks for Madame du Barry, who had the idea of coming to take sea baths in the area. There's nothing left but a staircase, a large Louis XV staircase, a few windows without panes, a wall, and wind. It's on a plateau within sight of the sea. Next to it is a peasant hut. We went in to get a drink of milk for Liline, who was thirsty. The little garden had lovely hollyhocks as high as the eaves, a few rows of beans, a cauldron full of dirty water. Nearby a pig was grunting, and farther off, beyond the enclosure, unfenced foals grazed and whinnied, their full flowing manes moving in the wind from the sea. Inside the hut, on the wall, was a picture of the emperor and another of Badinguet. I was probably about to make some joke when I saw, sitting in a corner by the fireplace, half paralyzed, a thin old man with a 2-week-old beard. Above his armchair, hanging on the wall, were 2 gold epaulettes. The poor old man was so infirm that he had trouble holding his spoon. No one was paying any attention to him. He sat there ruminating, groaning, eating from a platter of beans. The sun shone in the window onto the iron circles around the buckets, making him squint. The cat lapped milk from a pan on the floor. And that was all. In the distance, the vague sound of the sea. I thought about how in this perpetual half-sleep of old age, which precedes the other sleep and is a sort of transition from life to nothingness, the fellow no doubt was seeing once again the snows of Russia or the sands of Egypt. What visions were floating before those cloudy eyes? And what clothes he wore, what a jacket, patched and clean. The woman who served us, his daughter, I imagine, was a 50-year-old gossip in a short skirt with calves like the balusters in the Place Louis cans, and a cotton cap on her head. She came and went in her blue stockings and coarse skirt, and splendid Badinguet was there in the midst of it all, mounted on a yellow horse, 3-cornered hat in hand, saluting a cohort of war-wounded, their wooden legs all precisely aligned. The last time I visited the Lassay Chateau was with Alfred. I can still remember the conversation we had, the verses we recited, the plans we made. So the next, Deborah mentioned the, I think the letter to the funeral parlor. I'm not going to read that now because it's not in this book. But that was a sincere letter, or it started as a sincere letter of complaint to the funeral parlor about the word cremains, which is one of those borderline words that we've heard of, but we hear it, but not very often, so we don't really get used to it. We don't ever really accept it. But that letter and I did eventually send it in another form, but got no answer. That letter must have made me realize that I had other things to complain about in life, and that I enjoyed writing letters of complaint. So I wrote another few letters. I think there are about 5 in this book, and another 1 or 2 since this book. But I think I won't be doing that forever. Although there have been people who supported themselves writing letters of complaint to food manufacturers and getting coupons. So in case you're ever hard up, that's one way. But this one is called Letter to a Marketing Manager. Dear Harvard Bookstore Marketing Manager, I recently telephoned your bookstore to inquire about the matter described below and was told that you would be the person to contact. My question concerns an unfortunate biographical mistake printed in your January 2002 newsletter. I was startled to see on the back page of this issue that my recently published book was featured in the column titled Spotlight McLean Alumni. Now, I am aware that McLean's has a distinguished list of former patients and is among the most prestigious of institutions of this type in the country. But I have been inside its walls only once, and that was as a visitor. I stopped in to see a friend of mine from high school and spent no more than perhaps 1 awkward hour with him, since our conversation was at best difficult. Now, to be perfectly honest, in case this is the source of the misunderstanding, it is true that a member of my family was once incarcerated in McLean's. My great-grandfather of the same surname was for a time a patient of the institution, but this was in the early part of the last century, and he was not a seriously disturbed individual, as far as I can tell from what my father has said and from the letters and other documentary evidence I have in my possession. He was apparently no more than generally restless, apathetic at his place of employment, occasionally inspired with plans for irrational enterprises, dissatisfied with domestic life, and visibly oppressed by his wife's emphatically demanding and restricted nature. Although he did indeed escape the institution once and was then forcibly returned to it, he was several months later judged to have been rehabilitated, and he was released. He thereafter lived a tranquil, if rather solitary life, apart from his family, with a single manservant on a farm in Harwich, Massachusetts. I offer this information in case it may be useful, though I can think of no reason why you would confuse me with him. However, no other explanation occurs to me for your mistaken identification, unless your buyers assumed on the basis of the contents of my book, its title, or my admittedly somewhat wild-eyed photograph, that at some time in the past I was in Megan McLean's. It is always nice to have some attention paid to one's book, but embarrassing to be misidentified in this way. Could you please throw some light on the matter? Yours sincerely. And I'm going to end with a series of the very shortest stories in here. I was already writing fairly short stories at the time when I started translating Proust's Swann's Way. So my stories were already, say, a paragraph often. But I had practically no time to write when I was doing the translation. And I think also in reaction to his very, very long sentences and his long book, in fact, I thought I would try to write the very shortest piece I possibly could. And I enjoyed it, so I wrote more. So I'll read a few of those. The first one's called Bloomington. Now that I've been here for a little while, I can say with confidence that I have never been here before. Contingency versus necessity. He could be our dog, but he is not our dog. so he barks at us. Contingency versus necessity. 2, on vacation. He could be my husband, but he is not my husband. He is her husband. And so he takes her picture, not mine, as she stands in her flowered beach outfit in front of the old fortress. The bad novel. This dull, difficult novel I have brought with me on my trip, I keep trying to read it. I have gone back to it so many times, each time dreading it and each time finding it no better than the last time, that by now it has become something of an old friend. My old friend, the bad novel. Her geography, Alabama. She thinks for a moment that Alabama is a city in Georgia. It is called Alabama, Georgia. It takes longer to reach them back there. Sound travels slowly. The language of the telephone company. The trouble you reported recently is now working properly. Housekeeping observation. Under all this dirt, the floor is really very clean. Just a couple more. Her birthday, 105 years old. She wouldn't be alive today even if she hadn't died. Last one, PhD. All these years, I thought I had a PhD, but I do not have a PhD.